All right, willkommen and bienvenue. Welcome to another installment of 8th grade U.S. history with Mr. Bennett. Today we're going to be picking up where we left off with Chapter 13 on the Civil War. Today looking at Lesson 3, talking about some of the battles and some of the military activities that happened. But again, before we do that, let's go back and look at these short answer questions from the previous lesson. All right, so looking at question 3, what was each side of the Civil War fighting for? Well, hopefully you remember that the North was fighting for, right, the preservation of the Union. That's not to say that it wouldn't become about slavery later in the war. That's the second part of the answer, right? What wasn't the North fighting for? Slavery. They wanted to preserve the Union, bring the South back into the fold. Looking at question 4, describe the Northern plan of attack. That would be Winfield Scott's Anaconda plan. You could put Scott's Great Snake, to strangle the South using a naval blockade and divide them up the middle along the Mississippi River. And we'll talk about the fulfillment of that plan today with the Battle of Vicksburg. Question 5, what were some positive and negative aspects of Lincoln's leadership? Well, positive, he picked the best people for the job, right? He had a lot of excellent and differing advisors, people who provided him with different opinions. Another positive aspect, right? He stabilized our currency by issuing paper money. A third positive aspect was that he fired ineffective generals, right? He wasn't afraid to make changes if things weren't going the way that he needed them to. One of the negative aspects that we talked about was the conscription, the draft, which was incredibly unpopular, mostly because it targeted poor people, people who couldn't afford to essentially pay their way out of the draft. And then finally, question 6, predict what side you think will win based only on the resources available at the beginning of the war. Hopefully you all came to the same conclusion, and that would be the North, right? The North had vastly more resources than the South. All right, so jumping in with lesson 3, the Bloodiest War. So let's talk about some of these early campaigns, some of these early battles in the American Civil War. So most of the battles are going to happen along these border states in between the two capitals of the North and the South, right? The capital of the Union and the Confederacy. The capital of the Union being Washington, D.C., and the Confederacy had their capital in Richmond, Virginia. And these were actually very close to each other, right? Within a couple hundred miles, a week or so's march. So a lot of these battles are going to happen in and around those capitals because all you really have to do to win the war is capture the other team's flag, right? Capture the other side's capital, and the war will come to an end. So let's first talk about the Battle of Manassas, otherwise known as the First Battle of Bull Run, July 1861. So this is, again, about a year or so into the war. And so the Union, the North, tries to take Richmond. They want to have a quick and decisive victory in this war. They want to end it quickly, so they sweep south, trying to seize the southern capital, but they are held back, right? They literally hit a stone wall, General Stonewall Jackson, and the Confederate Army forces them to retreat. So this is one of the generals that we talked about in the previous lesson about how the South had much better military leaders, and this is one of them, General Stonewall Jackson. The way that you can remember the Battle of Manassas is if you look at that word, right? It looks like man-asses. So the good guys in the war, right? The North, they ran away, and when somebody's running away, all you can see is their man-asses. So that's how I try to teach myself to remember the Battle of Manassas. All right, second major battle that you need to understand is the Battle of Antietam, otherwise known as Sharpsburg. We'll always refer to it as Antietam, in 1862. So both Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee's, the Southern president and Southern general, they want to end the war. At this point, we're looking at essentially 2 years into the war. And they say, look, we have to invade the North at Antietam Creek, Maryland. They want to get up and around through Maryland and come and essentially surround the capital and conquer it, thus bringing a swift end to the war. 6,000 soldiers are killed in one day, making it the single bloodiest day of the war thus far. So the Union does manage to beat Lee back, but the Union general at the time, this guy, General George B. McClellan, doesn't chase him. He lets Robert E. Lee escape, lets him go and recuperate, and by not doing this, McClellan misses out on his opportunity to really take out the greatest general that the South has. And the biggest threat to Union supremacy. As a result, McClellan does end up getting fired because McClellan does have this history of running away, of not being terribly aggressive, and he's just not the right leader for the job. And so Lincoln eventually does end up firing him, and then he runs against Lincoln for the presidency a few years later. All right. So the North is struggling. They thought this was going to be an easy war. Turns out that it wasn't, despite the fact that they had all of these resources at their disposal, and they're suffering casualties left and right. This huge death toll is making the war unpopular, and it's making Lincoln unpopular. So Lincoln says, look, if this idea of preserving the Union isn't going to cut it, right, if that's not going to provide the moral or the morale support that we need, maybe we have to kind of shift gears and make the war not about bringing the South back in, but make it a moral crusade, an ethical crusade to end slavery. So after their victory at Antietam, the morale of the country is boosted. Soldiers feel good, right? They just won a major battle. Lincoln announces and signs what is known as the Emancipation Proclamation. So to emancipate means to free. So this declaration, this document, frees slaves, but only in the rebelling states, only in the South, not, mind you, in the border states of the Union that still have slavery. So slaves in the South are free. Now, what's the problem with that? One of the problems is that the South believes they're independent. They're not going to listen to the laws of the North. So legally, this has no standing in the eyes of most Southerners. However, it does motivate a lot of African Americans to flee to the North, and it does make the war about slavery. This is the first time Lincoln said, look, this is about ending slavery. This means that if the war ends and the South doesn't get their independence, the slaves in the South from there on and forevermore will be free. So it was controversial because a lot of people at that time still felt that slaves were still property, but Lincoln felt it was the morally right thing to do. He also believed that it was the only thing that could keep the war going. So Lincoln does this partially to gain support of both Britain and France. Britain and France have since ended slavery, but they've been supporting the South, right? They've been trading with them. They've been getting raw materials, namely cotton, from them. But now that the war isn't about independence, that it's not about, the South essentially maintaining their claim that they're fighting for states' rights. Now that the war is about slavery, and Lincoln has made it about slavery, he's forcing Britain and France to say they are either going to support slavery or they're going to support free peoples. And so Britain and France essentially have to back off, stop helping the South, and start supporting the North. All right, now let's talk about the single bloodiest battle of the American Civil War, probably one of, if not the bloodiest battles in American history. So the Northern strategy, this Anaconda Plan, Winfield Scott's Great Snake, has been working, the South slowly being strangled by this blockade. And ultimately, we see a huge Northern victory, though a hard-fought and hard-won victory, at the Battle of Gettysburg, which takes place on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1863. So Robert E. Lee, again, tries to move north and cut off Washington, D.C. from the Union, just like he had at the Battle of Manassas. He tries to, at the Battle of Antietam. And he's going to find just as much success here, right? He's ultimately not going to win. So Robert E. Lee moves north to cut off Washington, D.C. from the Union, and they have this huge, massive 3-day-long battle at a place called Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Long story short, there's about 50,000 casualties over the course of 3 days. So I did the math on that. That means there's about 700 people dying every hour, 12 people per minute, about one person every 5 seconds. So it'd be dead, 2, 3, 4, 5, dead, 2, 3, 4, 5. Absolutely horrific, right? Bodies littering the ground. So after this battle, which Lee does lose, he retreats, and the South never mounts a Northern offensive again, right? They never try to attack within Northern territory. So this is really considered the turning point of the Civil War. At this point, the North is on the offensive. They are attacking, and the South is essentially just trying to survive and run away. If you turn your attention to the right top-hand corner of the slide there, you see a really epic 20-minute heavy metal song about the Battle of Gettysburg from one of my favorite bands, Iced Earth. If you go check out the slides, you can watch that. You can also find it on YouTube. It's from the album The Glorious Burden. It's really good. It covers all 3 days of battle. It's a rocker. All right. Then, shortly following the battle, Lincoln goes to the battlefield after everything is over and is being cleaned up, and essentially he gives a eulogy for all the soldiers there. He's there to say a few nice words and to commemorate the battlefield as the final resting place for a lot of these American soldiers, because again, he considers the North and the South to still be part of the United States. So these are all American soldiers that he is responsible for. And so he gives this speech, and at the time it's just a short little speech talking about what these people have given their lives for, and explains the meaning of the Civil War. And he points out that this war is really, to put it simply, a test of our success, right? To see if this American experiment will be successful, and to see if the things we believe in and stand for can hold true in the face of such insurmountable differences. All right, and I think the last battle we'll be talking about today is the Battle of Vicksburg. So the Union had captured New Orleans, right, on the mouth of the Mississippi River in Louisiana, a major port. They've seized that from the Confederacy. Then they have to move their way up the Mississippi, ideally controlling the river so that they can bisect, right, split into the Confederacy, cutting the eastern half off from the western half consisting mostly of Texas and Oklahoma, which at that point are providing a lot of the agricultural goods. So at this point, the general in charge of the Western Front for the Union is this guy, Ulysses S. Grant. He is equally unafraid of, and I put it there, of throwing bodies at a problem, right? He's not afraid of sacrificing his men in order to win a battle. And so he finds this strategy to be very successful. And on July 4th, 1863, the day after the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederate Army at Vicksburg surrenders after being under siege for 47 days, right? For over a month, Vicksburg was under siege, and eventually Grant gets them to surrender, and that secures the Mississippi River for the North, effectively cutting the Confederacy in half. So again, this is kind of the downfall of the Confederacy that we're witnessing following the Battle of Gettysburg. So now let's look at some practice star questions. Question 1, which accomplishment could be added to this diagram? So we've got Ulysses S. Grant, graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, served in the Army during the U.S.-Mexican War, served as the 18th President of the United States. What else could we put in there? Is it F, commanded the U.S. military in the West during the Indian Wars? G, led the Radical Republicans in Congress during Reconstruction? H, was appointed General-in-Chief of the Union Army during the Civil War? Or J, became Andrew Johnson's vice president after Abraham Lincoln's assassination? Take a moment. Hopefully you come to the correct answer, which was H, right? Was appointed General-in-Chief of the Union Army during the Civil War. Doesn't start off as the General-in-Chief, but becomes the General-in-Chief. Question number 2, why did the siege of Vicksburg affect the balance of power during the Civil War? Was it F, several important Confederate generals were killed? G, Union troops were pushed back across the Ohio River? H, the Confederate territory was divided in half? Or J, severe casualties were inflicted on Union forces? What was the significance, the outcome of the siege of Vicksburg? It completed what plan? That's right, the Anaconda Plan, Winfield Scott's Great Snake. So the answer is H, they divided the Confederacy in half. Question 3, which of the following completes this diagram? So it says, encouraged African Americans to fight for the Union, strengthened the Union militarily and politically, and shifted the focus of the war to freedom for all. So what made the war about freedom for all, right? Ending slavery and getting African Americans to fight for the Union. Was it A, Lincoln's first inaugural address? B, the Gettysburg Address? C, the Emancipation Proclamation? Or D, the 13th Amendment? Which of these would have done those things? Pause it if you need to. All right, and hopefully you found that the answer was C, the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed all the slaves in rebelling states. Question 4, which of the following had the greatest impact on the outcome of the Civil War? Was it A, economic differences between the Union and the Confederacy? B, the amount of military training given to Union forces and Confederacy forces? C, religious differences between the Union and the Confederacy? Or D, the alignment of foreign allies with the Union or with the Confederacy? Which of these had the greatest impact on the outcome of the Civil War? Take a moment, pause the video if you need to. And that's going to be A, right? Economic differences, the amount of resources that both sides had. Question 5. A biography on the military career of General Stonewall Jackson would include his involvement in which Civil War events? Would it be A, the First Battle of Bull Run and the Confederate victory at Fredericksburg? B, the Union capture of Atlanta and the march to the sea through Georgia? C, the Virginia Peninsula Campaign and the Union victory at Gettysburg? Or D, the campaigns in Northern Virginia and the Confederate surrender at Appomattox Courthouse? Remember, Stonewall Jackson fought for the Confederacy, so that should be a pretty good hint that the answer is A. The answer cannot be D because Stonewall Jackson was dead by that point. He actually gotten shot by one of his own soldiers. All right, and then to wrap it up, some short answer questions to which I will give you the answer in the next lesson, right? Question 6, describe the battles of Manassas and Antietam and tell me why they are significant. Number 7, what was the Emancipation Proclamation and why did Lincoln really issue it? What were some of his other motivations? And then 8, what's the significance of the Battle of Gettysburg? Why is it important? Why do we talk about it? And then number 9, what's the significance of the Battle of Vicksburg, right? If something is significant, it's the first time something happens, the last time something happens, or it causes a major change. In this case, what major change happens as a result of Vicksburg? There's actually a couple of them. So we'll pick up with those questions in the next lesson, which will be about the end of the war. That's right, we're almost to the end of the Civil War, the biggest event in American history, and we hit it in 4 lessons. All right, so it's been fun, it's been real, but it ain't been real fun. This is Bennett signing off, and I'll see you guys in the next video.